Last week I reviewed the Nitro Deck, a handheld controller for the Switch that gives you bigger grips along with a whole bunch of different special features, and one of the questions that came up after that was how it compares to a similar option that was previously released from Retroflag, something that offers basically the same main selling points like the larger grips and Hall effect sensor sticks, in exchange for being not as much money. And I actually do have access to that Retroflag controller, so I'm going to walk through all the main ways these two controllers compare, but I also want to kind of leap from this concept as well and just talk about the general idea of the most comfortable way of playing your Nintendo Switch, because these are great options, but they're really not the only ones out there. We've talked about some other ones before, like larger Joy-Cons or using just a straight up Joy-Con grip. I want to talk about what benefits those options might still offer over these ones, or if these are really the new way to go. To start though, let's take a look at the Nitro Deck versus the Retroflag style controller. Now again, when it comes to the main sales pitches for these controllers, they're very similar. These are both controllers where you take your Switch or Switch OLED tablet and slide it into the body of the controller, offering a larger grip that is more comfortable. And as an added bonus, both of them also take advantage of Hall effect sensor sticks, an option that has become a lot more popular in recent years because it is a type of stick technology that does not develop stick drift the way that potentiometer sticks can. Both these controllers also have a couple of fairly standard special features, like both offering vibration, though not necessarily to the same quality of HD rumble that first-party controller is able to have, but they do give you some form of rumble, as well as both offering 6-axis controls so you can do motion controls in those games that support it, and neither of them are able to support scanning amiibo. So those are the things that the controllers have in common, and otherwise they begin to diverge a little bit, both in terms of additional special features as well as just the general build quality and how the buttons and sticks feel. For special feature list, this is pretty straightforward because the Retroflag is fairly bare bones on this. It basically supports 2 additional functions, one of which is that it does have a turbo function and also offers the ability to swap buttons. It doesn't have additional remappable buttons that are just freed up for you to do whatever you want with, but if you want to swap what certain buttons do on the fly on a hardware level, like you want to swap A and B for instance, it allows you to do that. Meanwhile, the Nitro Deck has quite a few additional special features worth mentioning that are not available on the Retroflag, including 4 remappable back buttons, a built-in kickstand, it has a locking mechanism to make sure the Switch is not able to slide out of the body of it, and then one special feature that I personally don't see a ton of use in, but I'm sure there's someone out there who would appreciate this, it does also have the ability to function as its own wired controller separately from the Switch. So function list wise, the Nitro Deck definitely has a lot more going on. As far as the core buttons and sticks go, however, there's a couple things about the Retroflag controller that I do prefer. First off, I like the shoulder buttons a lot more, primarily because they are buttons. For whatever reason, the Nitro Deck went the direction of trying to do this kind of half-pull trigger feel that reminds me a lot of the DualShock 3, which I'm not the biggest fan of. And while I normally do like having the option of full pull triggers, it doesn't really make a ton of sense on the Nintendo Switch, where the default is that there are no full pull triggers, it's just a button, which the Retroflag maintains. On top of that, while both of these do have pretty solid D-pads, the one on the Retroflag is a little larger and more pronounced, and I found to be a little more comfortable to use. And that's actually one of the biggest strengths to me about the Retroflag over the Nitro Deck, is that the way the grip shape is designed causes your hands to rest a little bit lower, which makes using the lower side of controls more comfortable. The Nitro Deck is just shaped in such a way that using the D-pad or the right stick is making you crunch your thumb up a little more, or at least in my case, it was having me do that with my hands, and I didn't really love the feeling of that. When using the left stick in ABXY, it was great, wonderful, super comfortable, but I just noticed that my thumbs were being a little more uncomfortable when using stuff on the lower side of the controller, which was not an experience I had on the Retroflag. I will say though, when it comes to buttons and sticks, I do also like the ABXY on the Nitro Deck a little bit more than the ones on the Retroflag. They're both pretty solid as far as third-party buttons go, but the Retroflag ones do have a tendency to feel like they just stick ever so slightly long when you've pressed them down, whereas the Nitro Deck has a little bit more satisfying immediate pushback. Again, neither of them I think really fully live up to OEM controllers, but if I had to say which one I like the ABXY on more, it would certainly be the Nitro Deck. One other minor thing, and this isn't a huge deal, but while both controllers can fit regular size Switch tablets and Switch OLED tablets, which are just slightly wider, I did find that the Retroflag felt a little weirder with the OLED. It's a very snug fit, and almost felt a little uncomfortable putting it inside of the tablet. It does work, it just feels like it's maybe a bit too tight of a grip on it. Now again, another important difference between these is the price points, with the Retroflag normally selling for $50, whereas the Nitro Deck is going for $10 more at $60, and that's just if you want to get the handheld by itself. Nitro Deck does also offer more expensive options, where if you want certain colors, you have to pay more, as well as getting a couple bundled in accessories, most notably a carrying case, which can be really handy for having something that'll fit your now much larger Switch with these bigger grips attached to them. Honestly, I think both these are solid options. I would say that the kind of simplified version of where one might be a better fit for you than the other is that the Nitro Deck wins out when it comes to feature list, whereas I do think the Retroflag just does a little bit better execution on its fundamentals. While there are certain specific things about the Nitro Deck that I do like more, the Retroflag to me does end up being a bit more comfortable, which is one of the main goals, while also being at a lower price point. Especially if you're interested in a GameCube color design in particular, the Retroflag is just that by default, whereas for the Nitro Deck, you do have to pay for the more expensive bundle to get that color option. Again, I don't think either of them is a complete knockout against the other, but that I would say is the main defining difference between them. Fundamentals on the Retroflag, special feature list on the Nitro Deck. So that's how I feel about these two controllers against each other, but I think the other important thing to recognize is that when your main goal is just trying to make the handheld experience of the Nintendo Switch better, controllers like this are not the only options out there. There are a couple other methods we've looked at in the past, like using larger Joy-Cons or using a grip, and I think some of those still have some very valid strengths over these. To begin with, larger Joy-Cons like the Split Pad Pro from Hori or the unlicensed option from Binbach, these honestly offer pretty similar benefits as far as just being larger, more pronounced grip, larger buttons, larger sticks, additional remappable buttons to work with on the back. Their biggest difference really is that you're not getting a full body that the Switch tablet slides into, and instead are just getting these pair of controllers. Which I will say in both camps, I do think this is a better solution if you want one that can also double as a traditional controller. The Binbach controllers can be used wirelessly with the Switch, while the Hori Split Pad Pro does have an attachment you can buy that turns into a regular one. And while I still prefer using just a straight up Switch Pro controller over those, I do like those in that form over using something like the Nitro Deck as a wired controller, because it just feels a little odd having this full handheld sized body that you're using as just a regular controller. That said, there is a simplicity and I think beauty in the unibody design of these cradle style controllers that, if your main focus really is just you want a better handheld experience, these are a lot more straightforward, I think, than using larger Joy-Cons, and is a strong solution in that case. Now, as for grips, this gets a little more interesting because with a grip, you're not really messing with the Switch itself, right? You're keeping the regular Joy-Cons, including all of their strengths and weaknesses, while simply adding a grip around the body that is making the Switch more comfortable. There's a couple different companies that I've looked at for the past like this, primarily Skull & Co. and Satisfye. Of the two, I have enjoyed Satisfye's products a little more on average. They actually did recently send me a newer model to try out, the Ronin, which is what I'm going to be showing and using in comparison to these other options here. And it's interesting to look at how something like this stacks up against these larger cradle controllers, because you're able to maintain some of the benefits of Joy-Cons. For instance, you're going to have actual proper HD rumble rather than a simpler vibration motor. He crawls so slow. Although, to be fair, you are feeling HD rumble through a grip that's around the system rather than directly holding it like you normally would. You're still getting the ability to read amiibo. And then one other bonus that's a little vain, but honestly, I totally understand for some people, if you have special edition designs or specific Joy-Cons you like the look of, you're able to keep using those. If you picked up a limited edition design, like the one for Tears of the Kingdom or Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, or any other of the numerous special edition Joy-Cons that have released over time, you're able to still use those and see those on your system while getting a more comfortable experience out of a grip. In the case specifically of this Ronin grip, there are a couple other interesting features or things about it that are nice to note. For instance, this particular grip is designed in a way that it will still fit in your Switch dock. There are a lot of older grips where that is not the case, and was a little bit of a headache if you wanted to remove the system from it. With this one, you're able to leave your Switch hooked up that way, including the Joy-Cons, just drop it into the dock, and then you can use whatever controller you want with it. And then I think one of the more interesting little things that I'm personally a little paranoid about, but I do think it's cool to point out, is that the Ronin does also sport a pair of places to put additional game carts. So if you're a dinosaur like me that likes to have most of your games physically, it gives you the option of carrying around a couple of physical Switch games so you can swap between them on the go, which is cool, but also kind of frightening at the same time. Because look, I've put carts into these slots and shaken the system a good bit to see if they'll come loose, and no, they stay perfectly firmly grasped in there. but there is absolutely a part of my mind that just cannot let go of the fear of, I just have a cart sitting here held purely by friction, and I really don't want to lose that. And thus far in my experience with it, it's given me no evidence to think that they could fall out, but the paranoia is still there. Another thing worth pointing out about the Satisfye Grip in particular is that one of their kind of mainstays for their grip designs is this offset design where it's not actually a perfectly symmetrical grip, where the right handle is shaped in a way that it prioritizes comfort for keeping your thumb on the left stick, which is what the vast majority of games really rely on Nintendo Switch. There are some games that give you the option for D-pad, but if you're using regular Joy-Cons, you don't actually have a D-pad and it's not all that great to use that 4-button setup. Whereas the right grip is oriented in a way where it doesn't optimize for the ABXY or the right stick, it hits the right balance between them, so either one can be comfortable adapting to the kind of game that you're playing, which is a neat little bonus. The downside to this approach is that while you're able to maintain using official Joy-Cons, you're maintaining using official Joy-Cons, which has their drawbacks compared to these other options out there. For instance, as I already said, you don't have a D-pad, you're relying on a 4-button setup instead that I have yet to meet someone who's really personally enjoyed that over a traditional D-pad. And on top of that, you are dealing with the smaller sticks that are built into Joy-Cons that have not as much freedom of movement, allowing for less precision, and obviously, of course, also include that fear of, could they develop stick drift? Worth pointing out that if you really like the idea of a grip, but you still want a way of handling that fear of stick drift in Joy-Cons, you do have the option of doing a stick swap. There are Hall effect sensor sticks out there sold by themselves that you can put inside of Joy-Cons. I've personally tried out the ones from a Gully kit, and while I do like the feeling of the OEM stick a little bit more, ultimately the Gully kit option still works fine and answers that main question of giving you a Hall effect stick instead of dealing with a potentiometer one. So you're still able to get that combo of larger grip and Hall effect if you want, you're just investing in multiple things rather than buying a single solution. Also, you have to open up your Joy-Con to put that work in, which not everyone is going to be comfortable with. Ultimately, all of these are solutions that work, and depending on what kind of additional things you want, whether that's remappable buttons or turbo buttons or whatever, there's going to be controllers that give you those options. I will say, for me, personally, I'm mostly a person who enjoys just good core fundamentals. I like having a pair of back buttons to work with, which is a nice bonus that the Nitro Deck or using large Joy-Cons will offer. But lately, I have been relying more on just using a grip on the Nintendo Switch, especially because it allows me to sport and use Joy-Cons that I like the look of. Again, kind of a vain reason, but it is a reason. Depending on what you're personally looking for though, whether it's also having a back button or some kind of additional special feature, any of these other options is a solid choice as well. All of them are linked down below if you do want to take a closer look at anything or pick something up. As always, if you enjoyed this video, hit the thumbs up button to let me know, as well as subscribe if you haven't yet, and I will see you guys later.